You're watching Fox 6 Wake Up for this Tuesday morning, and Gus is hanging out in Bayview.
And Bayview at Korinthian Violins. Korinthia Klein makes violins like this. She also varnishes them. Found out that varnishing is half the process. Tell you all about that when we come back in a moment or two. Stay with us. Violins, and yeah, it does just start with a simple piece of wood, but one of the things you learn when you're here is that there's no such thing as simple. Wood has to be aged, it has to be exactly right, and then in the hands of, can I call you a master yet? By the way, this is Korinthia Klein, which is why it's called Corinthian Violin. You make violins, you play them, you play viola as well. What's the difference between the two?
Between violin and viola? Viola is slightly larger. It plays in an alto range.
Okay.
Some of us feel they're better.
A little deeper. Well, okay. Yeah. Yes, all right. I'm not getting into that argument, not at all. But you started as a musician, then you decided to make the instrument itself. Were you surprised at how difficult they are to make?
It's very involved. I think when you get involved in anything complicated, it's always surprising just how much there is to it. But yeah, but it's endlessly interesting.
And you enjoy doing it?
Very much.
Now, in terms of wanting to do this yourself, you can make the instrument sound the way you want it to sound as a player. Do you save a lot of money in the process? How expensive are violins and violas?
Well, it depends on the instrument. I carry at my store instruments that are available for students that start as little as $350 for the instrument. And then the most expensive instrument I carry here at my store is a Derber viola that's $12,000. But out in the wider world, you can get a Strad for a few $1 million if you have a few $1 million.
Everybody's heard the name Strad. Strad is the Stradivarius violin.
Antonio Stradivarius was the most famous violin maker in the world, and we're still using his design and his patterns. So one of the things that makes violins so interesting to me is that compared to many things in the world, the design for these really hasn't changed much in hundreds of years, and for good reason, not because we're being nostalgic or quaint about it, but because they actually function really well, and they're beautiful.
Well, to do it, you have to start out with wood. It has to be shaved down. I was amazed at the intricacy of the work that you do and the tiny little measurements you're working with in fractions of a millimeter. We want to take a look at some of the tools you've acquired to do this, and there are some little micro things here. You're measuring the thickness of boards down to a millimeter.
Tenths of millimeters. Most
tenths of a millimeter? Oh boy. Korinthia Klein, it's Corinthian Violins. We're located in Bayview. For those of you flying across, you look for the sign on top of the building that says welcome to Cleveland. It's fibbing, but that's okay. It's Milwaukee. It's Bayview. We'll tell you more about violins and Corinthian violins when we come back in a moment or two. Stick around.
All right, thanks, Gus. New this morning.
Well, she plays the violin, and she makes her violins, and she makes other instruments for other musicians. Gus is checking her out today in Bayview. Gus?
This is her. This is Korinthia Klein, and you're right. She plays the viola. You play with which orchestras here in town?
Festival City Symphony.
The Symphony,
and I have
also
a string quartet, the Cream City String Quartet.
Okay, we're going to meet those folks a little later this morning.
A little later, yeah.
That'll be great. But in addition, you started making the instrument yourself. And this had to be, it's quite a process. I mean, we looked at it. You choose the right wood, and then you work at it. And I always thought that violins were kind of, you cut that out with a saw, and you kind of glue this thing together, and you bend the wood and make it work. I'm learning a lot about violins today. You don't bend anything. Everything is carved out.
Well, we do bend, a couple of things we bend. The rib stock. Ribs are made of maple, and they're the sides of an instrument. And I have to get them to a particular thickness, so I want them, this is a caliper that reads tenths of millimeters.
Tenths of a millimeter.
Right, so I want these, 1.1 millimeter thick, which is what I've got at the moment. So I plane this and then scrape it to the thickness I want, so it's even. And then I actually wet this a little bit, and I bend it on an iron.
And make the form. And that makes this bowed side of it.
It does.
But the top of it, it looks like that's bent too, but it's not.
No, that's carved. That's actually, in fact, it's carved to a very specific arch pattern. And the top of an instrument is slightly higher than the back. And you try to keep it symmetrical as best you can. So
I notice there's a little rib on the back of it, so there's some internal construction to all of these as well.
This is called the bass bar. It runs roughly under the position of the lowest string on the instrument.
To make all of this work, and then it all gets put together and glued together, and that's just the base of it. Then we have the neck and everything else. So you have to do all of this carving by hand.
Yes.
So you're a tool person.
I'm a tool person.
Okay.
And it takes a lot of tools. So for instance, a scroll People ask all the time how you make a scroll, and you start with a
Start with a
template.
pattern?
Yeah, a template. Scrolls are made out of maple, primarily.
Wow.
So you start, this is a scroll block, so I would start with this.
And this wood can't be fresh. You don't chop this out of trees. Maybe you did 10 years ago, but it takes a lot of time to put that together. Well, in addition to playing, in addition to making, you also give lessons, and you invite people to come in here, too, and learn about violins and violin making. Korinthia Klein. We're at Korinthian Violins. It's located on the south side in Bayview. We're going to tell you more about this place and take a look at some of the finished products and what they look like when we come back a little later. Stay with us.
Thank you, Gus.
Well, this morning, Gus is talking with a musician in Bayview who is making her own music. Let's check him out this morning. Hey, Gus.
Very literally making her own music. We're at Korinthian Violins. This is Korinthia Klein, who makes instruments, repairs them. You teach music, you perform, and you also varnish. And I don't want to say that in a facetious way, but I was surprised to find out, yes, it's a beautiful instrument. It needs carving. It needs precision. It has to be built beautifully, and you do it well. Where did you learn to do that?
I learned from a man named Brian Derber. He was living in Economowalk at the time. I spent 4 years apprenticing under him. He still has a school. It's up in Presque Isle now.
Okay. It would surprise me to say that there were people who built violins in Wisconsin, but there aren't that many violin builders in the country to begin with, and very few women.
Very few women, but there are more makers than you think. There are days where I feel like all I know are other violin makers. So.
But varnish, you tell me, is half of the job.
Yeah, varnish is an interesting process.
Now, this is an old violin.
Yeah, that's about 200-year-old violin from France.
I should, do I need to be very delicate with this?
You'll be fine. I can fix it if you do something.
Okay, because this one is in for repair. Now, when something like this gets worn and gets used, obviously the finish is going to get a little worn too. So changing the finish changes the sound of the instrument?
Yeah, actually varnish is sort of one of the sacred elements of an instrument. You really don't tamper with it if you can help it. You can find ways to sort of protect it or to retouch a little bit, but you never strip something unless it's also worth nothing, because it will soon be worth nothing.
Yeah, after that it just becomes a prop. So something like this, which you're going to do some repair work on, there's a loose part in the middle that can hear it rattling. But once the repair work gets done, are you going to recoat this for any reason at all?
No,
Okay.
I would not do that.
So that first coat of varnish is the important one.
Well, the very first thing you do to an instrument, because it starts off in the white, and then one of the things that makes violins so beautiful is that you're trying to enhance the wood, and so you need to be able to see through the varnish to the wood itself. So the very first thing you do is called the ground coat, and the ground coat can either be some form of color that you want underneath that you're seeing, or it can be a sealer to help protect the wood a little bit, and then beyond that you build varnish
Just
up.
build varnish coats up. So it is definitely an art in itself.
Yeah, you can have as many, because oil varnish in particular you need to sand in between, and you can have as many as 20 coats of varnish, but they're going to be sanded in between every time, so it comes out very, very thin.
Very thin and very careful. You're one of the few people that does all of this as well as setting them up. You also play in a string quartet, the Cream City String Quartet. They were nice enough to come in and join us this morning, so in addition to talking woodworking, I love the smell of sawdust in the morning, we're also going to hear some beautiful music this morning. That's coming up a little later from Korinthian Violins. Stay with us.
Thanks a lot, Gus.